and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, I'm joined by Chris Daly from ICBF in advance of presenting at this year's Teagasc Virtual Beef Conference to get an insight into the new commercial beef value. Chris outlines what it is and how it is going to have a positive impact on your farm. Chris, you're very welcome to the podcast. We heard recently of the Beef Data Genomics programme being rolled over for 2022. What are farmers to do to stay in the programme?
Initially, what farmers will need to do is to sign up, and that facility is now available on the Department of Agriculture website, agfood.ie. So they simply log in and follow the links and sign up for 2022. Alternatively, I think there's text messages being sent by the department through which farmers can respond yes or no to continue into 2022. Importantly, there won't be any paper forms sent out. So that's a change from previous years. Farmers won't get anything in the post this time. So it'll have to be done either through AgFood online or through the text messages. The requirements for next year then are exactly the same. So for herds using stock bulls, they have to have an eligible stock bull in the herd on the 30th of June 22. At least 80% of the AI used has to be 4 and 5 star bulls, and they have to meet the 50% female requirement on the 31st of October 2022. And the recording requirements are the same. So recording your calf quality, docility, cow milk, etc., and complete your Carbon Navigator update as well.
And Chris, when do farmers have to sign up by?
Yeah, so the deadline for signing up on to the rollover is the 20th of December at 5 p.m. So either a response to the text message or signing up online through AgFood has to be done by that time and date.
That's great, Chris. And currently there's a new tool being made available for farmers buying in cattle and bringing them on to finish in order for them to know what their genetic merit is.
That's correct. The commercial beef value, or CBV for short. So this is something that ICBF and Teagasc have been in discussions about I suppose throughout 2021 really. There was a big concern there that farmers buying animals were doing so, I suppose maybe blind is too strong a word to use, but with very little information to hand, particularly on the dairy beef side. If you think about calves going through the mart, for example, the only thing the farmers were able to really ascertain from looking at the calves was the breed makeup. You could differentiate between a black Angus or a black Whitehead off the dairy herd. You knew what breed they were. You could see if they were well looked after and if they were healthy. But apart from that, you really had no idea as to what their genetic merit was. And what farmers were finding, and this was coming back very much to Teagasc advisors out on the ground, was that 18 months, 24 months later, when farmers were trying to finish these animals, that then they were seeing the dramatic differences between calves, even calves from the same breed, and maybe in some circumstances, even calves coming from the same herds, where there was maybe different stock bulls or different AI bulls being used. So this tool will really give farmers just a bit more insight into the genetic makeup of the animals and help them make more informed decisions when buying them.
What animals will the commercial beef value be available for?
All commercial suckler animals will get it. So all of your commercial suckler males, so be that your weanlings or stores going through the mart, and any uncalved females. So once a suckler animal calves, it's not going to be available on suckler cows. All of your dairy males will get it. So your dairy bull calves or dairy bullocks going through the mart. And your dairy beef males and any uncalved females. So it's all your prime cattle really. Catherine, it'll be available for, pedigree animals won't have it. So particularly pedigree beef animals, the CBV won't be available for them because it's not a breeding index. It's only for animals that are destined for slaughter. Dairy females won't get it, and any calf females won't get it. So it's all animals apart from those will be eligible to get it.
That's great, Chris. And what traits is it made up of?
So you have about 20,000 beef herds in Ireland, but they don't have suckler cows. So these are herds that are buying either dairy beef animals or suckler animals and taking them through to finish. So if you think about it, what traits are of economic importance to them? So the carcass ones are the obvious ones. So carcass weight, carcass conformation, and carcass fat. That'll obviously have an impact on the end price of the animal. And while the animals are on farm, the two traits that will be important will be feed intake and docility. So there's 5 traits included in the commercial beef value. It's essentially the terminal index, but with the calving traits taken out, because if I'm buying animals, I'm not really concerned, or it doesn't really impact the economics of my system. If that calf had a difficult birth, or if it was long gestation, that's important just for the breeding farmer, for the dairy farmer, the suckler farmer, but not for the farmer that's buying the animals to take them through the finish.
And what kind of a range are you seeing in cattle and variation within breed for the commercial beef value?
Yeah, so I mean, look, if we look at the two extremes, I mean, at the top end, you're obviously going to have your extreme terminal suckler animals, and on the commercial beef value, so it's a euro monetary value, the same as the replacement terminal index or EBI. The extreme animals are coming out at plus 350, plus 400 euros, so that would be your real terminal suckler animals. And at the bottom end, then your really poor quality dairy beef. Your dairy cross dairy calves, really. So particularly some of these crossbreds or jerseys, they're going to be down at minus 200, minus 300 euros. So there's a huge range there. Now, interestingly as well, even within breeds. So when you look at, if you just take Frisian bull calves, for example, I mean, there's a huge range there from the best to the worst of those, as you would expect in any breed or any breed type. So that would be something that's of most interest to farmers. Like, a lot of them will have a sort of a set enterprise whereby they're maybe buying suckler weanlings, or they're buying, Angus heifers, or maybe Frisian bull calves. What farmers will be most interested in is what are the differences within that breed type. And in the CBV, what we have done is we have an across breed star rating, but we have within breed type. So we've split the breed types into 3. So you have your suckler animals, you have your dairy beef, so your Angus, your Hereford, your limousines off of Frisian cows, and then your dairy cross dairy, which is your Frisian bull calf out of a Frisian dam. So it'll show them the range within that breed type, and it'll differentiate, the best from the worst.
So I suppose if you take, for example, if you have an animal that's 50 euro value of a CBV versus 150 euro of a CBV, what does that mean?
Well, it's 1 for 1. So there's 100 euros between the two animals you described there in that example. So what it means is that there should be 100 euros difference when those animals are slaughtered. Now, a lot of that will be coming from carcass weight and conformation. But what farmers also have to remember is it's not all going to be in the output, or the selling price of the animal, because docility and feed intake are in there as well. Now, feed intake is not really something farmers are going to be able to see at farm level, but it is a very important trait. And when you think about, the cost of inputs at the moment, particularly the price of meal, that's going to be a very important trait. And also docility, So look, some farmers might say, look, all the cattle go into the shed, but at the same time, docility is important from a health and safety point of view, but also for farmers grazing animals. It's going to help on labor as well. If you've quieter animals, it's going to take less time to gather them up, to bring them in for testing, for dosing, for vaccinations, whatever the case may be. So it's not all going to be in the extra output from the carcass. Some of it will be in terms of savings on less feed consumed and less labor inputs because of better docility.
I suppose if you take a farmer standing in the mart looking at 2 different animals, how is this going to help them determine which animal to buy? Or are they ending up going to have to spend more at the start for a higher CBV animal?
Well, whether or not they spend more is really going to just depend on the market, and maybe the CBV is going to differentiate animals on price. And look, as I said, the market is kind of going to decide on that. But really what its purpose is farmers are still going to be able to do a visual appraisal of the animal, and they can see the breed type. Lots of farmers have preferences. You'd hear anecdotally that in marts, particularly with suckler weanlings, colour can have a big impact on price. And look, farmers are still going to be able to do all of that, but by having the extra information on the board, you could have 2 Charolais weanlings going through the ring, similar age, similar weight, but one of those animals could have a much better genetic merit for carcass weight. And if the farmer bought those 2 animals, there could be 50, 100, 150 euros difference when those animals are taken through to slaughter. So it's just giving the farmer more information at that point at the point of purchase in relation to the animal's genetic merit.
And how soon do you think it will be until this information will be available on MART boards?
Yeah, so we're currently in discussions with MART on that. And the plan is, or the hope is, to have this available next spring. So I mean, the big part, or I suppose the important period next year really will be, calf sales, from sort of February, March, April time, May time, that farmers that are buying these dairy beef calves will have that information, because they're probably the cohort of animals that are most critical. If you think of suckler weanlings, they're probably being sold at 8, 9, 10 months of age. And at that point in time, it's probably easier for farmers to differentiate between the good and the poor quality weanlings at that age. But a lot of calves, dairy beef calves, are being sold at 2, 3, 4 weeks of age. And it's very, very difficult to differentiate in terms of quality at that age. So that's why it's very important that the CBV would be available for dairy beef calves next spring.
And in many instances, some farmers that are purchasing in the dairy beef calves will see no sire recorded. How will that impact on the CBV?
Yeah, so where the sire is missing, the animals just simply won't have a commercial beef value. Because in that case, we'll just have a dam, which only makes up half the genetic merit of the animal. And, look, farmers are obliged to record sire breed, but not the exact sire. But, it could be an Angus, but without the exact identity of the animal. We don't know, is that a good Angus or a bad Angus or a mediocre Angus? So you can't put a commercial beef value on an animal where only half the ancestry is recorded.
And Chris, for farmers that are currently wanting to access the CBV for their own cattle or cattle that they're intending to purchase, how can they access it?
Yeah, so there's a profile. No, we're still doing some final testing on the profile, so it's not live and available to farmers just yet. But in the coming week or two, we're hoping to put that profile live. So farmers that are signed up to Herdplus can log into their ICBF account, and under the view profiles drop down, so similar to looking at your Eurostar profile or your expected calving profile, you'll see there'll be a commercial beef value profile, and that will just list all the animals that are eligible to get the commercial beef value in your herd. So it'll give just the tag number, date of birth, so basic details like that. It'll give their breed type. So like I described earlier, we have 3 breed types. We have suckler, we have dairy beef, and we have dairy. There'll be the euro value, so the commercial beef value itself in euros. You'll have a crossbreed stars, and you'll have the within breed type stars as well. Now, in the profiles, we give the extra information as well. So we give the values of the 5 traits that are included. So we give the carcass weight value, conformation, fat, and the docility and feed intake values as well. Now, that's not something we would be showing on MART boards because, space is at a premium, and look, it would be too much information for farmers. But because we have that flexibility in the profile, we can give that extra information.
And Chris, from analysis that you have done of all these different traits, what has it shown?
Yeah, so if you think about the traits that are included, like carcass weight and docility, feed intake, when you look at all of the traits across the different indexes, like the replacement and terminal, these traits, carcass, feed intake, docility, these are some of the more highly heritable traits. Okay, so generally speaking, you'll have animals that will have a high CBV will more often than not be the higher performing animals that will leave potentially more profit for the farmer at slaughter time. We did some analysis on dairy beef animals that were born in 2019 and slaughtered in 2021. So what I did was I pulled out a pretty large subset of animals. I ended up at 74,000 dairy steers. So I just confined the analysis to steers. So 74,000 was a pretty big cohort of animals. What I applied then was I used their index values from 2019. So when these animals were only calves, because if I use the current indexes, their carcass and kill out data would have fed into the evaluation. So, it would have been kind of unfair. We wanted to look at, well, what would the CBV when these animals were calves have said? And look, the correlations were very, very good. On weight for age, we had a correlation there of 0.35. And even better again, it was at 0.6 on conformation, which were quite strong correlations. Now, there's some more analysis that we're going to do ahead of the beef conference next week. We're going to look at some animals that went through Tully, because in Tully we had feed intake data as well. So it would be very interesting to look at feed intake. And look, as I said earlier, feed intake is something that's going to be very important going forward with the rising cost of inputs. And, especially because it's something farmers can't really see themselves on farm. It's not really feasible for farmers to record it. We can do that through Tully. So it would be interesting to see the correlation on feed intake there as well.
Chris, it'll be interesting to see the results from Tully that you're presenting at the Virtual Beef Conference this year. What else is happening at the Beef Conference this year?
Yeah, so it's starting off on the evening of Monday the 6th. Aidan Murray is chairing a session there, and you'll have Professor Frank O'Mara, the director of Teagasc, will be just talking about climate change and how the beef industry and beef farmers can meet the climate obligations. That'll be followed up by myself talking about the commercial beef value and just going through what we were speaking about there. Then the second evening is Wednesday, the 8th of December, and this session will be chaired by Matt O'Keefe, who's the editor of the Irish Farmers Monthly. So on that evening, Paul Crossan, he's the Teagasc Beef Enterprise leader. He'll be talking about the implications of slaughter age for beef cattle and greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of discussions around that at the moment, that, if we can reduce the average age of slaughter in Ireland, that it would have a massive saving there on the GHG emissions from the beef sector. And look, that will conclude then with a discussion between, that will include Frank O'Mara, Paul Crossan and Kevin Hanrahan, who's on the Teagasc rural economy side of things. So that'll wrap things up on Wednesday the 8th then.
Sounds great, Chris. We're looking forward to tuning in on the 6th and 8th of December at 8 p.m. and the registration link for the conference is included in the podcast text.
Thanks, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Chris for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.